Welcome to the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. Today on the show, I have Uday Kiran, a fellow storyteller and trainer who I met on LinkedIn. After 23 years of corporate career in organizations like Samsung Electronics, Wipro Consumer Care, and Everready Industries, Uday transitioned towards coaching, business, and data storytelling. Uday describes himself as a conversational storyteller. He's the man who goes with the hashtag 1 minute stories. That's all it takes to tell a story, he says. Uday is the co founder of Mentza, India's exclusive audio based confidence building app featuring live conversations with coaches and industry experts. During our conversation, Uday laid out anecdotes of where and how he has used strategic storytelling, the frameworks that he trains people on, his go to experts and thought leaders on storytelling, and Mentza, the audio app that helps you learn and perfect a skill. Lean in and listen to our conversation. The reason I am doing this podcast is because I've been working as a storyteller for uh, close to 20 years now. And I started telling stories in television, where, of course, you are looking at it from a journalistic point of view of information dissemination, shaping narratives. And the way we tell stories in television then and even now could make or break lives. But having stepped out of television, I sort of realized that it's a human skill and everybody needs it in some form or the other. And most importantly, that's the only skill I had for myself. So I said, what can I do with it? And in these 10 years, I've sort of understood how stories sort of connect the many dots in our lives in every sphere that you talk of it, whether it's business, personal, education, non-profit, human to human connections, legacies. All of it is sort of connected through these intersecting lines of stories that we lead and we sort of share with each other every single day. Um, when I started shaping my work as a storyteller in the industry, some of it was, of course, borrowed or inspired by what are other people doing in storytelling and who are the ones who need storytelling in what ways. But somewhere down the line, I started getting a lot of interesting work, which was sort of breaking away from the norms of what storytelling or storytellers were doing. And that sort of gave me a lot of very interesting pathways to see, okay, you want this to be done. Let's figure out how can storytelling make it easier for you, or can make it more effective, impactful, purposeful, all kinds of things. So that's how I started looking at the storied way, that anything in the world can be done through a story, and if it can be, then what it is. And then sometime I did my TED talk, and I talked about how storytelling will be a currency, because you're always exchanging something in return of a story. You're looking to sell something, you're looking to market something, you're looking to inspire someone, lead someone, however. So there is a transactional element towards storytelling, and what and how is it used as a currency. So I complete 10 years as an independent storytelling entrepreneur, trainer, coach. I'm also a performing artist. But in this realm, I sort of started questioning myself. What has, how has storytelling evolved? How are people, organizations really using it and leveraging it for the many things that they have set out to do for themselves? So that's the reason why I'm doing this podcast. It's both a project, it's a research, it's a study, it's a gathering of evidence. It is also teaching myself what others are doing, and I think expanding the understanding of what stories can do, and sort of we can all co-create a better world where people are telling stories more authentically, more purposefully. And that's the reason why we're having this conversation. So I thought of let me give you a bit of a background into this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think I know a little bit of this because we've been in conversation for a while now on multiple times, and I've also been very closely following you on LinkedIn and social media. It's amazing the kind of work that you do on stories. So it's a great honor and a privilege to be here in this conversation today.
Yes, and I think we also spoke while you set up Mensa, and we're going to talk a lot about it towards in the conversation. But we sort of never got to really do something on Mensa on storytelling. But I know you have been doing, so we want to talk a lot about that. So the premise of this entire conversation is that uh, is storytelling a currency? Do you see it being leveraged strategically, purposefully as a transactional tool in your work as a storyteller? What are you seeing are the trends out there?
It's a very interesting thing that you say the storytelling is a currency. The sense that I've never had a situation when I share a story and I get something else other than a story coming back, right? There is this wonderful line that you can't beat a story with a fact. You have to beat a story with a better story, right? So the best part of the stories is that whenever you share a story, you are always almost triggering someone else to share a story, and that becomes the great currency, right? So whether it is so, even if you just set aside the whole aspect of what you're why you're trying to telling the story for, it could be for a sale, it could be for engaging, inspiring, influencing people. At the end of the day, what a story definitely triggers is moments inside the person. It triggers connection. It triggers a deeper sense of feeling that this person is someone whom I can trust. I can relate to what this person is saying, and that is a phenomenal thing, which actually only a story can manage to do. And by the way, this is not something that has happened today. This has been happening since humanity has evolved. When the Bushmen sat around in the Kalahari Desert or the deepest parts, and they used to come back in the evening and they sit around the fireside and they used to share stories about, okay, if you go this side there is a lion, and if you go this side there is a water body. And the only way people understood stories, the only way people understood to express themselves with stories. Even today, if you know the way people can actually talk to you on all kinds of logic, but the only way we make sense is through a story. There is enough research which is proved. In my workshops, I do talk about this famous experiment, a scratch animation video that Hyder and Simmels have done. That scratch animation video, if you've seen it, where there are two, there's a big circle and there are two triangles, and they made this, I think, somewhere in 1944. It is as vague as it can be. It has no sound. It's just a scratchy animation in black and white. And then for 2-3 minutes, I'll make all the people see the workshop in the workshop see it. And I've tested it among thousands of participants. And every time I ask them, "What do you think of what is happening here?" Everyone has a different story. Correct? Everyone has a different thing. Some have a story that this circle is a bully. Some say this is father, mother, and child. Someone will say this is an Ek Duje Ke love story, a Bollywood love triangle. Some talk about vulnerability. Some talk about breaking free, etc., etc. Some talk about competitive advantage, etc. Eventually, the point that we want to make is that, which Haydn and Simmels eventually prove, that look, at the end of the day, the human mind, no matter how much ambiguity you put in front of it, will only make sense of it through a story that it understands. Right? No matter how ambiguous something is, we will make up our own story. And hence, if you flip that argument on the other side, I tell people that if you don't tell your story, people will make up their own.
If you don't tell your story, nobody else will. That's the point. You have to
Yes,
sort of
nobody else will.
step. Yeah,
Nobody else will. But in this case, people will anyway make up a story about you. People will anyway
absolutely.
make up something about you which you don't have a choice to. So the best way to kind of look at storytelling in the context of current business storytelling or strategic communication, whichever way you look at it, is that you got to own your narrative, right? You have to own the story,
Absolutely.
and if you don't own your story, you can't just sit and uh, wish it away, because people have anyway made up a story. So a CEO is
Absolutely.
walking around and not communicating what it really stands for,
Hmm.
whether it is the form of a story or any form of communication, can't just believe that people will understand on their own. People will have understood whatever they have, and it is up to you as a leader and as a person who's ensuring that you tell your story so that people will stand. So I think a very great point to start this conversation, that I completely believe that a lot of hype has been around business storytelling and everything else, but it is essentially boiling down to choosing your communication strategy and ensuring that what you have to be told is heard in the best possible manner without ambiguity. So you
Yep.
own your story and you say that. Of course, the whole art of and science of storytelling is about, while we are all natural storytellers, we all need to know how to organize the information and structure it and say it. And that is where this whole skill part comes in.
Absolutely. I was in a call with uh, somebody who's looking for story coaching or one-on-one coaching, and she's somebody who's sort of in a pretty much senior position, And while talking to her, I sort of, sort of reiterated, and she said, stories don't come naturally to me. I cannot reflect. I cannot go back, 20 years of my career and tell you what I did then and there. So I may be very frustrating for you. And I said, it's perfectly fine, because we don't spend time on reflection a lot of times, and which is where our stories get lost in the sands of time, in the reels of time. And bringing that in, contextualizing it at a given moment in your life, so that it stays with you, and the other person who's engaging with you can get very slow, tedious, laborious, and can get very frustrating if you can't get to that story. And then storytelling becomes very, very difficult. So building on to from what you said, Uday, I say that stories are of three layers. They are like the peels of an onion. So the first layer is the story that you tell yourself, and the second story is what you can tell others, and the third layer is what others tell about you. And you can, through strategic storytelling, communication, however you look at it, cultivate all three layers of this storytelling, or be able to have control over it or awareness of it, as long as you begin with the first layer, which is who am I and what is my story and what do I want others to know about myself. Take us through some of your work, Uday. Tell us, and tell the listeners about your story work. How do you enable people, teams, organizations in leveraging storytelling as a currency?
Thanks so much for asking that. So I've had a corporate experience over 23 years, and I remember I keep telling people every time that way back in 1997, a story got me my first job, uh, and I was in TAPI Management Institute, Manipal. We were all preparing for placements, and it was going to be a tough year for placements. And I remember I was sitting with my friend Pramod, and we were discussing various group discussion topics. And at that point of time, we said there was this one raging topic which was about a very powerful scheme launched by P. Chidambaram, who was the finance minister at that point of time, called the VDIS. It's called the Voluntary Disclosure Income Scheme. The whole idea is that it, tax collection has always been a challenge. So let's kind of do a one time, almost like a tax amnesty scheme. No questions asked. All you need to do is, if you've not had paid income tax for a long time or not declared, all you needed to do was to go fill up a form, declare what is your money, and 30% or 35% was collected. Deposit that money, no questions asked. And I think some 25,000 crore was collected. There was a full page cover of India Today that came. It was celebrated as the greatest tax collection initiative. And we said, Ye to aayega, this is going to be a perfect. And I remember talking about it, and there were many other topics that we discussed, but as luck would have it, 7 days later, I remember sitting in that interview, that group discussion, and the moderator opens the chit and says, okay, folks, your topic is uh, VDIS, boon or bane, go for it. And I'm sure you've been through group discussions in management schools, or at least been part of it, or at least witnessed it. They're a bit of a cross between Shivaji Nagar market in Bangalore or Sadar Bazaar in Delhi. I mean, I thought I was the only one prepared. Everyone was shouting, screaming, trying to make the point. It was an absolute cacophony. And I was appalled. It was 20 minutes supposed to be, and 10 minutes had passed, and I had not got a single point in. And I said, this job is going. I'm saying, where do I even get in? I couldn't even get in. And then about 10 to 12 minutes have passed, and I said, I have to do something. I have to figure out a way to get in. And then I think there was a collective pause, which I think was God's grace at that moment of time, where everyone perhaps stopped for about 10 seconds to take a breath. And I said, this is the time I need to get in. And the only thing that I remembered at that point of time was something that I talked to Pramod when we were preparing. And I said, look, folks, it's a great scheme from a perspective of 25,000 crores, but my father joined as a clerk in State Bank of India about 20 years ago. And his salary when he first started was about a measly $100, which was very big at that time. And then he grew in his career. Today is, of course, the vice president of the bank. And he had to support on a very measly salary, large family, his parents, extended family. And I can remember that all through his struggles, all through his growth in that bank, he never defaulted on paying his income tax. And I think there are millions of other honest public government servants like him. And I think this VDS perhaps does a gross injustice to someone like my father. I said that, and there was 30 seconds of silence, and I didn't know what was happening. But then immediately everyone started talking. But the good part is I didn't have to talk anymore, because the next 8 to 10 minutes of the discussion, was all about what I spoke. The whole conversation was all about that. And needless to say, I got the job. And a couple of months later, Ram Menon, who was my I was joined the company called Eveready Industries, and we were working in a market. And he said, Uday, when did we make a call about you? He said, when you told that story, somewhere it kind of made the whole thing shift. And that is why I kept kind of keep telling people that the story got me my job. So if you just notice what I just did today, what I just did in the last 5 6 minutes, it is a slice of life from my whole experience. And I might have told the story a lot of times, perhaps hundreds of times. And I used it to kind of tell it to students. If I were to go and talk to management students, I talk to them about how to prepare for interviews. I use it to talk about the importance of storytelling and how to make a point. I also use it largely to demonstrate that look, if you're listening to me, you're in the right place to learn storytelling because I'm a good storyteller. Somewhere, the whole aspect of show don't tell has to come through because you want to demonstrate that you're a storyteller. Uh, what I largely call this, and I learned this from Sean Callahan, who talks about putting stories to work, great book that he's written. I call this a connection story.
Yeah.
So, what does most of business storytelling does is, or rather, what most storytelling does, is that it connects you with the person. So typically, I would stop here and ask someone, what else did you understand about me through the story? And someone, if Rituparna would have introduced me as a guest who is a 25-year of experience, blah, 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 you would still agree. But then somewhere, I would have shown a little bit of myself here. So typically, it goes on, right? A couple of months later, I was in a market which is in Vishnupur, in Burdwan district of West Bengal. I got get into my job. First 7 days of induction was in Kolkata, rainy park, beautiful guest house of Eveready, a lot of treatment with the best of all the senior leaders. And then I was shunted off in a Shatabdi and I was holding a bag at about 10 o'clock in the morning full of batteries and torches standing in front of a wholesaler. And I was wondering, is this what my parents really worked hard to put me in an MBA college? What is happening? And on top of it, this Bengali wholesaler, and I come from a very small town, South Indian town in Vizag, perhaps the first time I'm out of Andhra in that sense. And this guy was shouting at me, chased abuses in Bengali, and had no idea. All I knew is that he was absolutely scolding me. See, those days, Eveready used to be a product in demand. And if you walked into a shop, people wanted this Eveready batteries and torches simply because that would help them to really sell everything else. So if you walked empty handed, uh, that was a terrible thing for them. And I didn't have stocks. And I think my sales officer who was inducting me sent me there to face the music on the first day. So I was standing in front of this guy and had no clue. And the voice and whatever abuses this guy was giving me, the wholesaler, it made me hustle. It made me run. I think I begged, borrowed, no mobile phones these days. This was 1998. So I had to call people. I did whatever I could. But in the next 3 4 hours, I still didn't remember how exactly it happened, but I did manage to get his quota of batteries and torches that he wanted. I took that carton and gave it to him. And he was so happy. He asked me to join his lunch and he treated me with the best rasagulla that I've ever had in my life. Right? And that was my day one in sales. And I then went on to and do uh, uh, have a fantastic journey with Eveready and then Wipro Consumer Care and then of course with Samsung, sold soaps, batteries, torches, mobiles, TVs, everything, and then eventually moved on to a calling that I had to work with leadership and people. Now this is the way I introduce myself, and I say that, and I typically pause here, and I ask people, what else have you understood about Uday Kiran here? People say a lot of things. People say, okay, you're a good salesman, you're a good hustler, committed. People say that you're a good storyteller, you're honest. Some people also say, hey, is the story real because it's too good? So a lot of people ask me that.
Too good to be true.
So what happens eventually in the first 25 minutes is that suddenly an audience which is wondering what is all of this session, why are we here, everyone gets connected and everyone is thinking and they get to know you. And I think that's the whole purpose of business storytelling or conversations. Now, you could move this into a context where you could be talking to a bunch of you could actually be talking in a conference and you have maybe another topic and then you pick up. So this whole ability to glean out specific moments of our life, because all of us have moments in our life which have made
Yes.
us who we are. We know those moments. It's like a old attic which has all got a lot of things, and suddenly the only reason we don't know what to do about it is because it is what it is, an attic, and we are not organized. So
Hmm.
I see storytelling, business storytelling, as a process where you go into that attic, dust out all the cobwebs, and organize and sort every memory in a way in which it is tagged and labeled, so that, and you set up a system, and of course do the hard practice where you're able to retrieve it and
Yeah.
connect it to the situation that is. So the raw material is there, the content is there, the hard part, and sometimes, and you know this better, the boring part, and you talked about that lady who was, the boring part is about that organizing, structuring,
Yes.
labeling, cleaning, and retrieving. That I think is a definite skill, or a definite skill that one has to learn, and that is where great leaders are able to do that. So
Hmm.
no leader out there is just like that, telling a story out of his own. Every story out there, which you, even to the extent of perhaps the most controversial figure of our times, Donald Trump, even he rehearses what he says, right?
Yes.
It might
Yes.
appear to you that he's not planned it, but you may not like it, but then he's thought through that. So
Yes.
this whole, this is what I talk about. And now what I've done is, over the last 3 4 years, I've had a journey as well. When I did my first ever workshop after moving from business, during lunchtime, I thought a lot of people will come and say, wow, they're fantastic transition, man. But I realized out of 18 people, only 2 or 3 people were having lunch. I say, hey, what happened to the rest? I said, they had a lot of work. They may not join the second half. And then 1 or 2 guys came and said, Uday, you're giving too much of gyan. This is not who you are. You're trying to be someone else. That's when I realized that I'm not good at talking theory. I'm not a teacher. And the only value that I can bring in a workshop or a training is when I am able to relate to my experiences and other people's experiences. And that's how I can build something. That's when I
Hmm.
went and learned this whole aspect of storytelling, right? So, so for me, business storytelling is all about how do you enable stories and conversations, not making them appear like stories, but using it as a strategic communication tool to engage, influence, inspire, create change, sell, or give other person a purpose or answer a why, right? So it could be
Yes.
a lot of things, but that's my framework for business storytelling. I hope that
Uh,
answers your
oh,
question. I know
yes, it
it's a
does. It
long
does
answer.
answer it and answers, sort of connects the dots to many of the things that I had outlined to speak to you. And of course, I have personally also, you said stories, trigger stories. I also have a story about how I got my first job, which is because of my name. I got a story. It's because of my name. And that's also, I agree that sometimes how to face interviews, how to talk about yourself, how to project a future version of yourself, not that what you're today and what you will be, and how do you stand out from others. But from that story that you spoke about, the GD, I was sort of connecting it to something else that the other story that you told about Eveready. I noticed that you are a good listener, and a good listener and a good storyteller needs to, of course, when I am talking to someone, or when I'm trying to walk into a conversation, I'll have to wait for my turn. And that's what you did in the story about your the GD for your first job, where you waited for your turn because you know something, but is it the right time to say it? Everybody's saying something very different, and it's very contrarian to what you want to say, and you sort of validate it, so you evidence it with a story. And then the second instance, of course, you're talking to a stakeholder of, you are the vendor, that's your client, and your client is somewhere troubled by you not being prepared for serving that client, and therefore there is a sort of a tension which could lead to a sort of severance of ties, or some kind of a you know a disgruntlement that can lead to the loss of that client. And in both cases, what I noticed is that you sort of picked on the ability to listen, to understand the other person. And why I'm pointing this out is because that's such a valuable tool to have, whether you are a leader, a manager, a professional, somebody in sales. And let's talk about sales, because that's something which you've spent a lot of years working in. So how critical is we talk about storytelling as this whole act of moving people to a certain action, but how important is listening as a step precursor, and how do you sort of enable people to listen to become good storytellers, and do you do that at all? So I'd like to
Oh, that's a
share that.
wonderful question. And I have two answers for that. First one is I want to just point out to you and obviously the people who are listening to this is that I wanted to just pause and say when I just came in to this conversation, I don't think you ever perhaps would have called me someone who's going to be good at listening. Or even if you had introduced me and said that this guy's a storyteller and blah blah, these finer nuances of the values that you just mentioned, like I'm a listener, I wait for my time, I'm patient, I understand. These are all things that you picked up because this is what came through the story. So I keep telling people that when you tell a story, it's a pull strategy simply because people get to know who you are without telling yourself. So you could say that Uday is a great storyteller. He's got great empathy. Last time I interacted with Uday, he was having great. Now all of these words are very abstract. Empathy. He's a very strategic. He's good. People will nod and say yes and maybe be deferential to you because obviously there's a white hair, there's a bald head, there's a designation. People will respect age or whatever. I think what happens because what you can achieve through a story is that you're able to actually convey a lot of those things. And that is a connection. That is a connection that you do. And the way you narrate a point about a story would actually become the way you do it. For example, you know this better. If I were perhaps talking to a bunch of students preparing for an interview, I would have told the story completely differently. I would have told the same story emphasizing on the first part where I sat with my friend Pramod, identified topics, and this came, and that is why I got a job.
Yeah.
So, you have different. So that's one part of it. And thanks for pointing it out. Sales. Sales, all of us think that we are natural storytellers, right? We all think, and in my experience, Rituparna, it's been the most difficult time for me, as from a storytelling trainer perspective, to convince sales guys that they need storytelling.
Yeah.
Because sales guys have this general feeling that that includes me, that we generally feel that we are very good at it, and hence our propensity to unlearn something is very low.
Mhm.
Vis-a-vis, let's say, my best success in the last 3-4 years, or rather, people have really gone up to the next level are folks from finance and tech, because they generally come with the feeling that हमको ये story वोरी नहीं आता है, हमको सीखना है, and they actually put that effort and commitment and do that. Sales, we do tell stories and we do make up a lot of stories. We do that, and I think it's an extremely powerful one.
The Storied Way perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag Podcasting Network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstorybag.com. At the end of the day, sales is a very individual, let's say, skill that every person on the job in the field will sort of do it differently. And of course, industry to industry, market to market, people to people, client to client, your ability to read a customer and to be able to find your pathway into a sort of a rejection or a proposition or whatever. All of this is based on so many factors, and when you sort of
Yeah.
look at, this is not a sales question, but it is sort of still a storytelling question, which is, of course, when you put a bunch of sales folks together, the kind of knowledge sharing which will give them enough strategies to sort of be able to build on each other's experience, build on each other's knowledge, build on each other's skill sets, and see that, okay, how do you read a customer, because this is how you read your customer, and how somebody in your team helped you deal with that situation better. So I think this knowledge sharing is also a valuable pathway in the sales space, because that will sort of strengthen people's abilities. And it's also a very competitive space, isn't it? Salesmen are always competing against each other for better commissions, for better leads, easier leads, and greater relationships. But in that, how do you see storytelling be an enabler?
That's a great question, because it kind of helps me to put through a structure for it. So Ritupurna, one of the things that we need to understand is that sales, no matter what selling you're doing, you could be selling an insurance product, you could be selling a chocolate, or you could be selling an automobile, or you could be just putting our own training proposals to a company. There are always essentially what I typically the largely standard 6 steps, or what I call the sales cycle is always 6 stages. The first one is when you're typically researching and understanding the market. So you're basically scanning what is it, what is the available market, and of course, who are there, who are the key players. The second stage is always the prospecting. Right, you're actually reaching out to the prospective customers. You're trying to reach out. You're trying to do your outreach programs. The third one is, let's say, once you prospect your customers, you identify a set of customers, then you're starting to understand their needs. So you'll go to a person and say, okay, what is it that you want? You want a training? Okay, fine. What is the end objective? You're understanding their needs.
Yeah.
So if someone wants to buy an automobile, okay, what kind of? So that's the third stage. The fourth one is you prepare a solution. Right? You suggest a solution. Okay, this is what you want. So we have a product which has got these features, and this is how you marry. So that's the fourth stage where you're meeting the solution. The fifth stage is actually closing the sale, forcing a closure. You're pushing for that. Now that everything is done, you're forcing the closure. And the last stage is, of course, the one which is all about post sales. How do you build a relationship once a person buys a sale? Now, if it's a bubble gum, let's say an FMCG product, this cycle happens very fast.
Yeah.
Because there is already a planned beat of retail outlets. You go to the retailer, you look at the stocks, you do all of this. Maybe some of these things are given that you go. It is not as if you don't go through this process, but some of these things are automated, and some of these things go very fast. Now, if it is let's say a Mercedes car, then each of these processes is very, very clear, right? If it's a B2B organization, let's say you're trying to sell your storytelling program to someone, then you're anyway understanding the needs and you're anyway researching the market. Each of the stages could be there. Now, the reason I talked to you about the sales cycle is that when you're using storytelling in a sales process, then you have to have a strategy for each stage of the story step. So typically what I always say, and this is from Paul Smith's Sell with a Story, is he has this beautiful concept called, when you actually are in the first 2 stages, when you're understanding when you're actually researching and when you're prospecting, that is where you need to kind of get attention. That is where you need to hook the customer. So you need to have a story which kind of hooks. So I call it the hook story. Right? And then the second 2 stages, where you are actually understanding the needs and providing a solution, this is where you're telling that my product is better than that, my product has this is the reason you should have your product. There you're providing insights, there you're providing features, benefits, all of that. That bundle of entire stories is what I call the fight stories. Right? So the first one is getting attention of the customer, it's called the hook. The second one is all about fighting for attention. And the third one, where the decision is being made, where they're closing the call, deciding that you are the vendor, deciding that he was going to purchase, and of course the post. Now, those are the times where you also may not be physically present. You may not be always there. If it's a B2B deal, maybe the person whom you're interacting with is now trying to sell it within the organization. If you're buying a Mercedes car, the family is getting together and finally deciding, okay, humko ye car kharidna hai. And so someone else is actually your champion and not you. You don't be there. Which means by then, you should have embedded enough stories which are of your values, which is how good you are as a person and how good the brand is, how this brand will never fail us, how this brand is most reliable. You should have had fed all of these stories there, so that your ambassador or your champion is able to tell those stories. And those stories are what I call the land stories, where you're landing the team. So typically these stories are like, for example, if I'm going to buy this car from Uday's showroom, a couple of years back, my friend bought it from there, and the car broke down, and Uday ensured that one of the other cars was replaced, and for 1 full month, Uday ensured support. That is why we should go to Uday. Now, if I tell that story and leave it with that guy, it is an ammunition that that person will have to convince his internal stakeholders.
Yeah.
So these are three categories of stories, right? The hook stories, fight stories, and land stories. So one of the most important things that I tell salespeople is, now you get all the salespeople together, and I say, hey, tell me what are the things that you've done to get attention, because I don't have the stories, those guys are the stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we get the inventory of stories from them. So it's a small 2-3 hours workshop. Tell me somewhere where you actually got rejected and you projected a value that is very important for you, and you get a story there. Or tell me when a client was facing you and you actually projected a solution that he liked a lot. And we, over a period of time, like an anthropologist, or in that workshop, collect a lot of stories. People
Yes.
know these stories already. You just have to
Mm.
trigger with the right question,
Like you
and then
said,
you help them to
like you
practice.
mentioned earlier, like sorting out the attic. It's already
Yes,
there. They're
so it's already there.
all heaped up,
Correct,
but it has
right?
to be put in its right place.
So once you get them, and then it is a matter of getting it into the story bank, and then ensuring that you practice the story, and then having it told. Now it is not an easy process. It
Mm.
takes time. But if you know, by the way, most people are already telling these stories, even without them attending a storytelling course.
Yeah.
Suppose there is a person who is, by default, let's say you're decided to buy a Mercedes car from me, and you've got a good connection with me. You're actually deciding with your husband and family. You're already, and if you're committed to it, you're already telling a story that helps with it. For example, you said, Uday is a good guy. Last time, this is what he's done. You're already doing it. We are just trying to pull it out and show to the people that, look, this is something that you can use. So
Mhm.
the first hook story is all about building a personal connection. So which means the first purpose of any story in business, whether you're in sales, HR, and by the way, all of us have to tell sales stories. A
Yeah.
trick question that I ask in every session is that, how many of your salespeople, and the team could be all HR, and nobody lifts their hand.
Yes.
And then I ask
I do
them,
this too.
aren't you doing a proposal? Aren't you trying to
Yes.
get an attention? Aren't you getting a budget approval? So we're all doing selling. So the first part of any storytelling is about building connection.
Yeah.
That is where you're building credibility and rapport. So you need to tell a story. A connection story tells you that I am like you,
Mm.
and you build a relatability, or you make the person feel connected to you because of an emotion, of a value that resonates with both of you. And then come the product and the inside stories about why this product, or how did this product can solve your problem, the journey of how this product really solved another customer's problem. That is where the second set of stories. And the third set of stories is how this brand or customer or the vendor will always stand by you in the biggest things. A very interesting insight that I had is that you don't get the best stories from the salespeople. In fact, if you really want to know the best stories about salespeople and why people take what is it, you should go and sit with the purchasing department. The guy who the guy who onboard the vendors.
On both the
You should,
vendors.
yeah, you should sit with them and say, tell me, why do you, when you're selecting a vendor, if you remove the price aspect outside,
Mm. Mm.
why do you like this vendor?
Mm.
And then they will have a story,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that story
Yeah.
becomes a very valuable one.
And that becomes a very valuable insight into the purchasing insight of a customer, because you have customers internally as well, and that's fantastic. Uday, there's something that you say, and you use this hashtag in your content on your LinkedIn, which is 1 minute stories.
Uh,
And right now you sort of gave us beautiful, deep stories. You laid out pathways, you laid out structures, and you've also confessed somewhere that stories take time. The preparation takes time, or the telling takes time. What is the concept of 1 minute stories?
One of my favorite uh, quotes that I always say is attributed to Blaise Pascal. I know a lot of it is attributed to Mark Twain, but I researched enough that this specific quote is from Blaise Pascal, and he wrote this letter saying that, I'm sorry, I'm writing a very long letter because I don't have the time to write a short one. Right? Uh, I think telling a 1 minute story takes a lot more effort than telling a 5 minute story.
Absolutely.
And obviously, preparing for 1 minute stories is a lot more difficult. Incidentally, when I was sitting around in the pandemic and figuring out what to do, and I wanted to become this guy in LinkedIn, and I wanted to start writing, a couple of posts that I did was very bad, and I didn't realize what was happening. So I was thinking, what should I do? And one of my favorites TV series is the Big Bang Theory. And there's a specific episode in Big Bang Theory when all of these guys are preparing for Star Wars Day, and they're trying to explain it to Penny, who's one of the characters in the Big Bang Theory, that you know what Star Wars Day is? May the Fourth be with you. And it so happened that that day was May the Fourth, and I was very curious. How did Star Wars come out, and how did May the Fourth come out? And I did a little bit of research on Google and everywhere, and I realized, hey, this is a nice, interesting nugget of a story, and I can explain it. The original draft that I read and I wanted to post it on LinkedIn was about 600 words. And then those days, it is not now, but those days LinkedIn had a character limit in 2001 where you can't do more than 225 words. So I had to struggle to kind of cut that story and edit it and still retain that by the way, that story is still on my post. And I had to get it to 225 words. And then I realized, how should I tag it? I said, everyone is tagging their post by something else. How should I tag it? I had no clue.
Hashtag. What will be
And
my
then
hashtag?
hashtag it. So then I realized this entire thing is finishing on 1 minute. So I said, let me just randomly put it as hashtag 1 minute stories. And that's how 1 minute stories became. And then I said, it got a lot of recognition. A lot of people said, hey, that's a nice thing.
Yeah,
Then every
it's got a
Monday
nice ring to it. It's got a nice ring to it. Yes.
And then every week, I started posting a different story. So that went on to become a newsletter and a blog called 1 minute stories. It had about it still has it's on a pause right now. It had about 100 stories, got a lot of subscriptions, and I started developing this ability to kind of write a story within that 300 to 350 words, and you can actually say it in about a minute.
Yes.
And that's when I discovered conversational storytelling. So when the time came to me, when it came to me that I had to build a company for myself, I said, what more? This is something that I already have. And that's how 1 minute stories. Essentially, 1 minute stories is more concept oriented. I know it is very difficult to tell something in 1 minute, but I completely come from this perspective that stories have to be part of a conversation. The only thing that pisses off people is the moment you say, I'm telling you a story, people go mad. So what I try and tell people is, and that is something even I try to do, is to get in and get out of a story even before someone realizes it's a story. And that broadly can be achieved in about 60 to 90 seconds.
Yeah.
So while I call it 1 minute stories, oral stories tend to take a little more time. They don't finish exactly in 1 minute. They tend to figure out in 70 to 80 seconds. But most of my stories don't take more than, of course, if I have the luxury of time and I know that you're listening, then I get into a lot more details and flesh it out. But most of the things that I try and do is just in a minute or so, I can finish it off. And I think that's a skill that you have to develop.
Absolutely, that's a skill that you have to read the audience. You have to read the audience. You have to read the moment. You have to read the reason why you are telling a story. I sometimes use a trick and a technique, and I teach that too, is to tell a story without telling one at all, and that can be done exactly in a minute or even less than that. It's like you sort of align yourself with a lived experience that most people would have. So you talk about learning how to ride a cycle, and you say that you remember how we all learned how to ride a cycle. We would have had a tricycle, or we may have moved our training wheels to move to two wheels at one point of time. And what we are doing right now is just that we are removing the training wheels and we are learning to cycle. So you tell a story which is just similar, shared, lived. It's a metaphor in certain cases, and it's sort of in and out of a story, like you said, before somebody realizes, oh, this person was telling me a story. And that's sort of gone.
And the other important thing about stories that in business is that we've been talking about stories, but the most important aspect of a story is to either preface it or make a point with it. Because in business, at least, we are not telling a story to entertain people.
Entertain, absolutely.
You're telling a story to kind of make a point. You want to solve complexity. I want to prove that I'm a good storyteller. I want to prove that I'm a good lawyer, or I understand lawyers, whatever. I am if I want to showcase that I understand logic, then you tell a story which kind of shows. So that is the second point. The third point is the story is always about a specific moment of time. Absolutely. It is never about 25 different moments. It can have three or, at the best, I think it can have a couple of moments. But really, if you're able to, the whole idea is to kind of, if you're able to zoom into that one specific moment of time and show people exactly how people felt and how people around you did, that experience of that moment is what makes the story really come alive. And largely, if you look at our life, and if I were to ask you, when you read a book, what are the couple of things that you really liked about that book? You'll always only talk about that one or two moments in a book. You go to a Shah Rukh Khan's movie and come back and say, what was something that you liked? I like that.
That stayed
even
with
if in a 3-hour movie or a a lifelong relationship, we always tend to remember the key moments, right? I mean, at the top, you will remember a lot of other things, but the ones which really moved you are the 2 or 3 moments. So if you're able to get those moments out in a story
Mm.
and crunch it to about a minute and a half,
Mm.
and then figure out what is that moment telling you, what are the values that you discovered for yourself, I think that's enough. So you
That's
just
it.
need one which showcases your success, one which connects you with people, one which shows how you reacted from failure, and one which where you have created a change. That's all you need in your life. You need just 4 stories, and you can run your life with storytelling with these 4 stories, because at any point of time, the same moment can actually mean different things. While you have to
Absolutely.
tell one story for one moment, I could use the same story to tell a different story for a different moment. Right? That's about personal stories. Of course, you are collecting a lot of stories from the books you read, from podcasts you do.
Mm.
That's a different sorting altogether.
Mm,
Right?
mm,
Those
mm,
can be used. But
mm. That
if
that's why
you're
that's why my work is around calling your story bag, which means that
yeah,
you have to identify a story bag for yourself where you sort of put all different stories of different shapes and sizes and forms, and the same story. It's like being repurposing it. That how can I mix and match and sort of use this story and leverage it to make another point with another audience. But then it's not a static experience. It's sort of it's a dynamic experience of a sort of going and looking at finding and sorting your story back from time to time so that your attic doesn't get cluttered all the time.
yeah, and it's a way of being. For example, I'm sure you understand this by now, and I know a lot of participants who've been there. They come back and say, Uday, after the session, and some of them who are actually on the path say, now we can't read a book or watch a
Hmm.
Netflix without stopping it, pausing it, and noting down that there is a story here. At some point of time, you will naturally get into this. Like how, for example, once you start swimming, then you don't think too much about the swimming itself. Then you're
Hmm.
actually just getting into the water
Hmm.
and doing.
Hmm. Hmm.
So this is a skill like bicycle riding. When you're getting
Absolutely.
to learn bicycle, you are figuring out how the balance is. But once you start riding the bicycle, ask someone how do they do the balance, you don't know. So I think this whole process of storytelling and collecting a story becomes a part of who you are.
Yeah.
Of course, there is this book by Matthew Derrick's, which is called Story Worthy,
Hmm.
where he has a process that I've started following for a long time now,
Homework for
where
life.
at the end of the day, open an Excel sheet and
Yeah.
just type down what is that one moment that was a story worthy moment for the day. And then you don't look at what is happening. It's like a compound interest or a savings pack. Look at it after 60 days, and suddenly you have one heck a list of stories.
Yes.
So over the years, and that's perhaps what I would call the most boring part of my job, but I think that's a bit like going to the gym every day,
Oh
right? It's
yes.
almost like that. But I have built a story bank. You call it a story bag. I call it a story bank. It's the same metaphor. Today, the only thing that I would always want people to remember when you're creating a story resource or a bank is that you should design it in such a way that you can retrieve it easily. The
Yes.
biggest problem that all of us have in being organizers, I would write stuff on a notebook and then I forget where the notebook is, right? So if you are able to catalog and put it in a, so sometimes you could use something like Evernote, or if you have any other system, that's fine. Even your mobile phone is fine, but keep it in a place where you are able to search it and retrieve,
Yes.
and then I think you're in a good position. So all of this, I think, is a part of a focused learning experience.
Now.
Uh, and this is where I think someone like you will add value as a storytelling coach or a trainer.
So homework for life. That is the let's say exercise from Matthew Dick's book
Correct.
called Storyworthy, and I have something called small stories. I say that we all look for this big turning
Yeah.
points in our life, milestones. Not everybody has milestones, and not those milestones are not really story worthy at the end of the day. But and that's another thought, that I don't have big turning points in my life. So that means I don't have a story to tell.
Yeah.
So what instead I teach people is look at the small stories, and there are certain frameworks. Just say, I heard something, I saw something, I spoke to someone, this happened before me, and that's it. That's where the stories come from. It's as the shortest route to finding a story and using it, leveraging it somewhere else. is given. And to all the listeners of the podcast, I'll share a link to something I wrote on this, how what's the framework for gathering the small stories of your life. And it's pretty much the same thing, that it can become a compounding exercise if you do it every single day. I'm also somebody who creates a lot of prompts for people to enable them to gather their life stories. So I for an entire year, I did something called 365 days, 365 stories. That if you have nothing else to do, sit with a prompt and gather that story from your life and sort of package it and tell it to someone else.
Simon Sinek has started talking about start with why. And I know a lot of people say, let's start with why. Interestingly, you will never get a story if you ask why.
Yeah.
You'll only get an opinion. You'll only get advice. So if you're really searching for stories, the way to start it with is how, when, where, how, who, and maybe even which, right? How did your parents meet? Or how did you get this? Or the most interesting question that we always ask is what happened? And then when you ask what happened, the best advice that I've always got from a coach is that once you ask what happened, the only thing that you do next, Uday, is to shut up and wait. Because most of the time when you say what happened, then you start answering. Now I know what happened, then you get into that. Let the story emerge. So what you tell as prompts, I've also cataloged a set of questions which are story triggering questions.
Yeah.
And the beautiful aspect about this is that once you tell a story, the audience will understand your why. Most of us go on this journey of finding the purpose of our why. But try it out. When you tell a story, and that story is obviously authentic and it is told in the way it is, people can understand why. For example, when I tell the first story, when I keep sharing the first story, people say, "Now we understand why you want to be a storyteller," or "Now we understand why you want to be a listener." Now we understand why where you've become this, how this entire thing is evolved. Some people say, "No, now we understand why you choose the path after 25 years because you were already a storyteller at the beginning." So people make up a lot of things. Some of them could be true, some of them could be attributed, some of them maybe I have not even thought about it. But people do get the why when you tell a story well.
I agree and disagree, and I have a different take on it, which is your why is something that can emerge over a period of time. I used to teach in Delhi University and I taught for 5 years. And one of the most dominant questions I would be asked is, how do you know what you want to do for the rest of your life? And because I had transitioned in my career myself, I had moved from television to becoming a teacher, a storyteller, a performer, coach, and all kinds of things. So, young girls happen to ask me that, how do you decide, that storytelling is the purpose of your life? I mean, how long will it take for me? So that why and how and when can emerge over a period of time. But when it does, when so that clarity comes, you know what your why is for that day, that moment, that phase of your life, and that why can keep evolving. So why
Yeah.
did I get into storytelling is my why. I know why I got into it, not because everybody else needed it, not because this is the only thing. And I always say, when have stories shaped you? How have they helped you out to get from point A to point B? If they have, then you are already convinced that storytelling works. It works in this situation, and then another, and so on and so forth. But having said that, your why can also evolve with time. And at different phases in your life, your whys can, there could be more evidence and more stories and more incidents as to why do we do what we do. That's one of the questions that I ask people.
Very interesting point, right? Elizabeth Newton, 1990, I think she's from Stanford University, psychology professor, and she did this very interesting experiment where she divided a class into two parts, and she called one part the tappers, another part the listeners. And she said, "The tappers, you guys can go and tap any song that you like," and she asked them to tap the simplest of songs, like "Happy Birthday to You," "Wish You a Merry Christmas," and the listeners had to guess the song.
Guess the song.
And the tappers were said, "Okay, even before you tap the song, just need to tell me one thing, that what is the percentage of people who will guess the song correctly." Tappers were very confident and they said, "Look, 70%, 80%." And when the tappers were tapping, very simple song like tuck, 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 the listeners were just not able to guess. And the tappers were frustrated and said, "What the heck? This is such a simple song," because they could listen to the song in their head. And finally, you would know the overall average of how many people over the world guessed it, right? Elizabeth Newton comes out with a startling statistic that just about 2.5% people have actually guessed the songs correctly. And she kind of does all of the study, documents it, it's available on the web, and she comes out with this great concept of the curse of knowledge.
Yeah.
And she says that, look, once you know something, it is impossible, almost impossible for you to not know that. See what it is to not know that, right? Once you know something, it is almost impossible for you to understand what it is to not know. For example, once you know how to ride a bicycle, it's very, very difficult to understand what it is a person is feeling before he rides a bicycle. And incidentally, this is the same thing about strategy. The reason there is this huge study which has been done by HBR, Kaplan and Norton, I think. They did the study and they came out with the summarizing statement that almost 95% of companies' employees do not understand the strategy of the organization or why is the strategy. And I think the reason it happens is because we are always talking in abstract terms. For example, the CEO might say, we want to enhance stakeholders' value. When you say we want to enhance stakeholders' value and that kind of trickles down, people don't understand what is it for.
Yeah.
Unless you're able to tell a story. But story is the only thing that can actually beat the curse of knowledge, because story helps you to go into that point of time and make you understand. Super.
I'm having a lot of fun having this conversation, Uday. I think we can go
I'm
on
me
and
too.
on. Yes, but we have to sort of close it, and I'd like to sort of come to the critical bit about how, what is your recommendation? We've spoken a lot about where storytelling works. You've given some great examples, and you also mentioned about going back and learning a bit more about storytelling so that you're more action oriented in terms of what people are expecting and how can they leverage this. So what is your go-to list of thought leaders, experts, books,
You should
podcasts?
look up to a couple of people whom I've learned from, on whatever I've been sharing is a
Mhm.
list of all of these people. If you're someone who's really wanted to get better in this entire aspect of understanding strategic communication and the concept of storytelling, I would always strongly recommend Sean Callahan,
Yeah.
Putting Stories to Work. It's a big fat book, but it's a great one. You can
And
also
even their
follow him.
podcast, even their podcast is
Even the
very good.
Anecdotally Yours is a
Yeah.
great podcast. It's a good place to start. Chip and Dan Heath have written the best set of books on how to use. While Sean talks a lot about the whole aspects of storytelling, Chip and Dan Heath actually give you a great bundle of rich stories and specifically the use cases. So I would recommend Stories, Switch, Movements, The Power of Movements, some of the great books. I have learned a lot by following and listening to Matt Abrahams. Okay, he's my go-to professor, professor of communication, strategic communication, Stanford. I've had a privilege to take a course from him. The learning never stops, right? You have to keep
Absolutely.
doing it. So I've attended a strategic communication sessions courses with him. Uh, I've learned a lot about communication frameworks and structures. I used to hate structures, but I've really adopted structures a lot because I think his famous word is structures make you free.
Yeah.
Matt Abrahams is someone, and I think his book called Think Smart and Talk Smart, and also his podcast on YouTube is a great starting point. I'm a great fan of a couple of other people whom I really learned. Some of my colleagues, Ravi Shankar Iyer, whom you again can follow on LinkedIn, is a great data storyteller. I've learned a lot from him. Brent
I subscribe
Dykes,
to his newsletter. Yes,
yes,
I get his newsletter every Saturday
Brent
morning.
Dykes. Brent Dykes is another character whom I have learned from his book. And of course, there are a lot. I do a lot of work in data storytelling. So I have this entire thing on data visualization and work that you should look at Brent Dykes, and I think he's a good entry point if
Yes.
you're looking at data storytelling. Yeah, so these are some of the people that you really can look at, and you could also follow me
Yes,
on LinkedIn.
all of them are on LinkedIn. So I just want to tell all the listeners that fine, go get on LinkedIn. There's a lot of thought leadership happening on storytelling every week as we speak, and the names that Uday mentioned, they're all there on LinkedIn, and you can connect with them. And Uday, of course, you can connect with Uday.
And
Uday,
Rituparna, of course.
you before I let you go, tell me about Mensa. Is it a
Okay.
storytelling platform? Can people go enroll? I discovered that the app has changed since the last time I was on it. So it's a sort of evolved in its avatar and its utility in people's lives. So can you talk a little bit about
I'll
Mensa?
spend about a minute or two on that. And I
Yes.
think, thanks so much. So during the pandemic, there was something called Clubhouse. That's a good starting reference because Mentza is an audio app. We started off because we said that in edtech, people weren't really getting engaged. While there was a lot of Coursera, Udemy happening, the rate of completion was very poor. People weren't learning, but people were paying. And we said there should be a place where people can just go have fun, have informal conversations. Because the best conversations that I've learned from in my life are what are typically called the chai sutta conversations when
Mm.
you're having tea in the corridor. And that's how Mensa evolved as an audio platform where you can actually talk about anything in the world,
Mm.
learning oriented for growth oriented professionals. The name Menza is about mentors having maza. So that's where you actually have a lot of cross connections and 20-minute conversations on a specific topic, recorded very clean, no hanky panky. But we've realized we had to change. When we had to change, people enjoying it, but when we had to figure out, we said learning has to be a lot more purposeful for the period we discovered. So the app has had multiple pivots. So today, as you see Menza, I call it the only exclusive soft skills development platform that is focused on career success, which has got AI based assessments and coaching and live courses and coaching. Right. So what do we have? We have three components. So we've got AI based assessment. So for example, you could get onto Menza, download the app, and and we are targeting young professionals, students, and the whole idea is that you build confidence. The whole idea is that confidence in speaking specifically or in life will only happen when you're able to speak. There is no app in the world where you can go and speak without permission. And
Mm.
this is where we have in Menza, you can speak and you could listen to podcasts, you can learn. You can get into YouTube videos and learn. But the only place where you can develop confidence, the only way you can develop personal confidence, whether it is in storytelling, in communication, or in your subject, or for your interviews, is when you yourself speak. Because
Absolutely.
if you don't speak, then all the listening and learning that you do isn't actually going
There's
to.
no
So
application,
the
so
whole
it hits you
aspect is on
apply.
bias. And even on stories, I tell that you only get better in stories if you tell the stories. All of us are in this thing that I want to be a storyteller. You have stories, but you never tell stories, right? So what have we done? So as soon as you get on the Menza, you can actually go through a whole host of assignments. For example, let's say you're preparing for an interview. We have designed a complete host of interview packs where you can actually take an interview assessment and a fantastic AI which actually interacts like how Rituparna and me are doing, and you get an immediate feedback, and that will recommend a multiple sets of courses that you can join on the app by the best of coaches. And then you also have live courses which you can attend for 30-35 minutes, recording courses, and then also you can also practice with community with like-minded people. So the whole process of assessments, coaching, and then we've covered topics from interview preparations, from HR internship to jobs to technical interviews. And then let's say Ritupurna, you have some story frameworks. You talked about I have heard something. So in the same way, I have also put out a lot of things about how to tell a story. So you if you want to test your storytelling skills, you can get onto Menza, you tell your
Mm.
story to the AI, and AI will give you a feedback in a safe space, right? And then you can actually practice it endlessly, improve, and then go try it out with community or in a platform and then come back. Because I was telling to an IIT professor the other day when I saw an IIT student who are on our app, by the way, that she did a 15-minute interview with a mock interview with the AI. And I told her that, sir, I don't think this girl has ever spoken in English for 15 continuous minutes ever. Think of it, Ritupurna, and this is the last point I'm going to make. Outside our elite circles, get out of a Bangalore or get out of a Gurgaon or even within Gurgaon, when does a student or a young professional get 15 to 20 minutes of conversation and time in a safe space where he's not feeling judged and he can practice speaking only in English? Almost zero.
Absolutely.
Because 99% of the time they perhaps are speaking for the first time continuously in
Mm.
English in a
Mm.
job interview and not before that.
And that can be so intimidating for someone who's
And
taking
so
her
what we are
first
providing a space
interview.
is for so what Binza is providing is an opportunity for you to get ready before the big one. So that's what we have designed. So it's not just an AI thing, but we've evolved into a place where you can actually be coached by some of the best coaches. I hope to have you as one of our course coaches very soon, as a storytelling coach, as a conversational coach. And then we have topics on resume building, career, emotional intelligence, how to handle difficult conversations, early leadership traits, soft skills, how to build your confidence, and a whole host of other topics, entire spectrum. So I think we are the only soft skills enhancement app, completely audio. Why audio? Because audio is easy. You can get on the move. You can listen to it when you're
Yeah.
commuting. Today, 2 hours is in
It's
Bangalore traffic.
non-intrusive. It's
It's
non-intrusive.
non-intrusive.
Wow.
You can do that, and you have assessment reports in your feedbacks. That's what Menza is all about. It's a subscription platform. So once you come on, you get about five options, five chances to kind of assess and figure out what you want to do. And then the subscriptions are fairly economical, but it's a transformative app. In 3 months, we have seen people evolve from very hesitant, fearful situations of speaking to confident speakers who can go on and have conversations.
I think what I'm taking away is right now, other than the invitation to be on a Mensa, is to sort of study the app and see how is Mensa using storytelling to enable young professionals to step up in their careers. I think that's going to be another fantastic conversation that we could have another day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Uday, for this wonderful conversation. I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot of things about you, your work, and your perspective, of course. I hope you enjoyed this.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks for pushing me to do this. I know we've been trying to do this for a long time,
Yes,
and I really enjoyed it. It's been an hour and a half or so, but I don't think I've realized so
nearly.
much of time has
Yes,
passed. And that's what stories do. Stories make you forget time.
yes.
Stories are timeless. Pun intended.
Absolutely. And it's always good to sort of drop a story and pick it up whenever you meet next. It's always easier to pick up a conversation with somebody who you shared stories with. And that's something that I would recommend every listener to go and try and do. Share a story with someone or ask for a story before you even tell. Ask for a story and notice how easy a conversation the next time becomes, how easy that becomes because you gave the teller an opportunity to be heard. So thank you, Uday. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Take
Thank
care.
you so much. Bye bye.
Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi-monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them what can stories do in the world today. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.